Hello, it's Dawn Michelle from Boho Tarot, and welcome to my monthly journal pages. Today we'll be flipping through my January pages and chatting about the journal spreads, techniques, and ephemera I created to connect with my personal tarot practice last month. So let's jump right into my tarot journal. So this year I am using a Traveler's Notebook style tarot journal, and this is my long-awaited Chic Sparrow cover. This has been really wonderful to work with this month. So I've actually filled it with some extra cards in here. I guess since it's actually filled out, and the last time we saw it, I was very much still putting it together. We'll take a quick flip through what I've got in here now. So these are just some extra cards that have come with decks that I've purchased, some extra postcards that I just thought were really cool that I like to hang on to and wanted to make sure that they didn't run away on me. I have just a little title card for the Inner Compass Oracle in here because I like it. And then I have, this was one of the extra cards that came with my Llewellyn. And this was a card that I practiced trimming on when I first got my deck and started trimming it. And what I did is I turned it into a little journaling card, and I wrote my prompts for my monthly reflection that I do in my journal so that I can just pull this out and refer to it every month. So that's actually been really handy. The rest of this is kind of just tucked in here for now so that I don't lose it. In the back here I have some cards that I've gotten from friends and some cards from some decks and things of that nature. So just kind of mementos in the back here. So we're going to do a little bit of a longer flip through this time around because I have finished filling out a lot more. I do have 3 booklets in this journal at this time because I didn't end up doing the monthly Instagram challenge. I didn't end up creating a book for it. I hope to be able to get to that this month, but we'll just kind of have to see how it goes. I've been really busy trying to plan these really big kind of tarot series for my channel and some courses and guides and things of that nature. So it's kind of taken a lot of my time away from some of my kind of more personal practice things. I'm also working on a tarot deck. So I've got a lot of stuff going on right now. So my tarot journaling is kind of, I don't want to say take a back seat because it certainly hasn't. It's still one of the most important parts of my day, but I haven't been doing as many readings as I normally would because I'm just kind of a little bit pressed for time right now. So anyway, that is not in here at this point, but I do have my kind of like I call my dashboard insert. This is the one that will stay in here throughout the year. This is the insert I created for January. And this is the insert that I created for my Tarot by the Moon readings. We'll take a look at those all in due time. So I did end up doing my first page. I wrote my intention on there. I have my book list of books that I want to read, decks that I want to study, decks that I want to work with. I've already started on some of these, so I need to check them off. I have extra space over here. And then I also have my deck wish list, which was decks that I'm planning on purchasing pretty much for all of these when they come out. The Touchstones Tarot is one that I think it's going to be re-released. If not, then I might try to get myself a copy of one of the out-of-print versions. But the Tarot of Echoes, the Mother Tarot deck, and the Muse Mass Market, none of those are out yet. So those are kind of on my list for when those come out. I have my little pocket insert, which I haven't put anything in here yet, but I'm sure it'll happen. My year ahead reading. And then I have all of my cards from my year ahead reading. My reflection here on that reading, and then I have an extra page here which I will do a kind of wrap up at the end of the year, and that's what that page is kind of earmarked for. And that's the end of the first insert. So then we get into January pages. So this booklet I believe is one I did create on camera in my 2020 journal setup video, which I will link in the description box below. And I believe I did have to take it apart. I think I did mention that at one point, but when I made this booklet originally, I didn't have this cover yet, and I made my booklet too big. I don't know what was wrong with my dimensions, but they weren't correct. So I did actually have to take it apart and trim it and restitch it. And I ended up taking out a couple of pages, and it turns out that was a really good thing because I mostly filled this, but I do still have some extra pages. I have just a book page here, and then I have my list of decks I worked with. This is kind of just like my title page or my cover page for January. I have my little calendar. I have my moon phases, which I realized when I went back to look at this, I had accidentally written the wrong date on the first one. And so I went through and fixed that. And then just another book page. And here over this book page, this was a card or an image. To me, it's the Hierophant. That's kind of what I designed it to be. This is a card that I created, and I was kind of just playing with some ideas for some deck creation things. But anyway, I love this image, and I decided to go ahead and just put it in my journal just to keep it, because this was kind of the start of me thinking about not me thinking about creating a tarot deck, because I've actually been thinking about that for some time, but this is my first real creating a card. And the funny thing is this card isn't in the deck that I'm currently creating, but it's set aside to be in a different deck later on. But anyway, I loved it, so I included it in here. Just pasted it over the top of this book page, and then drew this big black border around it just to kind of give it some space. So we have another book page here. This was my January forecast that I did, and you can see I used the World Spirit Tarot and the Earthbound Oracle. I have my reading date and then just my little reflections. And then here I did another reading. Oh, this was my first week reading for January, which actually started on December 30th. So I put it in here after my forecast, even though I actually did it the day before. Doesn't matter. However it goes in is however it goes in. Again, using the same decks. This was one of the sort of nested readings that I did, where I did my 3-card reading originally on the first day. Then I expanded beyond that with another 3-card reading. And then I expanded beyond that with another 3-card reading to expand on those other 2 positions. And then I also have my reflections here. And then here was the whole reading expanded. I do have a video in my Facebook group about how I did this. It is based on Natalia here on YouTube, is channel Ouroboros. And it is based on her idea of a nested reading. So I do have a video on that on my Facebook group where I think it might have been this one that I actually did and showed how I did it. This was the first Devas of Creation card that I pulled. So I just collaged it or made a color copy of it, put it in here, kind of drew around it, and then here is a little bit about the card and, you know, my reflections on it in the back. And this was going into the next week where I did a sort of deck interview spread with the Wild Unknown, but it didn't have set positions. I asked a question, pulled a card, asked another question, pulled a card, asked another question. So it becomes what I call a conversation reading. And you can see here's the cards that I pulled from the conversation. I put it on a book page and then I just drew lines over it. So I don't know. But here's the actual reading. And, you know, it basically I just pulled a card as if I was talking to the deck in the conversation. So the first question was, you know, how do you feel about our bumpy start? Because the Wild Unknown and I have not had a great history. So I pulled that card and then, I asked that question and then I pulled the Chariot. Then the next question was, you know, it was the Chariot. So I asked, okay, it's the Chariot. So where are we going? Then I pulled the Ace of Swords and it says into the darkness. All right, well, what are we going to find in the darkness? Then we pulled Justice. So it keeps going on and on like that. Based on the cards that I pull, I ask questions based on those cards. So it's like a conversation. And that's just one of the ways that I like to get to know my decks. Then I started working with the Wild Unknown and the Archetypes deck. And this was another reading that I did and put that into my journal, of course. And then another reading that I did using the Wild Unknown and the Archetypes. And you can see my printer started running out of ink, had to replace that. This was the second Devas card that I pulled. And this card is not named the Queen of Heaven, but as soon as I saw it, that was the first thing that popped into my mind. So that's what I wrote in here about it, because that was as soon as I flipped that card over, that was literally the first thing that popped into my mind is it looks like the Queen of Heaven. So that's what got into my journal. And now every time I see her, I think she's the Queen of Heaven. So moving into the next week, I worked with the Solera Culto Tarot and the Messages from the Light. And I did just a basic 5-card reading with my center card being the messages from the light and the focus of that reading. And then I did just my reflections on the cards around it. This was a meditation draw sort of doodle thing that I did. Occasionally I will pull a card. A lot of times this is from the Tildewick Tarot, and I use this deck a lot for meditations because for me it has so many little details to dive into for meditating, but it also has a very calm and reassuring energy for me. And so I like to pull a card and just kind of think about it, meditate on it. For this particular one, I pulled a card and then I just made a photocopy of it, pasted it in here. And then as I was thinking about the message of the lovers, I was doodling flowers all around it. And it was just a little kind of a pause in my day, a meditative moment. And then again, another reading that I did, 3-card reading with the Solera Culto and the messages from the light deck. And this was a much larger reading that I did, so it had to end up going sideways in here because I used the archetypes, the Solera Culto, and the messages from the light all in one reading. And it was this wonderful big reading that I did. Although you can see that my reflections are really kind of concise and small. A lot of times I write big, lengthy reflections, but sometimes I just get to the heart of the reading, and that's what I put into my journal, because that's the most important thing that I want to remember is the heart of the reading, the main message that I got. So that's what's in here. And then I moved into working with the Moon Void Tarot and the Flowers of the Night Oracle, and I really enjoyed working with these two decks. I did a little weekend focus spread where I did basically kind of like a 9-card, and I used my one Flowers of the Night as my focus and then read my cards around it, sort of in a Lenormand type sense, and just did my reflections and of course some doodles. And this was the affirmation from the acceptance card. And then that was a reading that I did on Monday, and interrupt that and we'll come back to that one. And then on Wednesday, I did a midweek check-in with acceptance. So I pulled back out the acceptance card and I pulled 2 more cards from the Moon Void Tarot to kind of look at how am I stepping into that energy of acceptance this week? How am I doing with that? And so that was my midweek check-in. And then at the end of the week, I did a really big reading with those 2 decks together. And it was kind of just, where am I at on a conscious, what's going on in my superconscious or my higher mind? What's going on consciously, which is the line for the Oracle cards, and then what's going on underneath that in the subconscious mind. And then I got a message like as if this was my superconscious, my subconscious, and my conscious mind all having a conversation with me. So that's how I put it in there. That's how the reading went for me. So that was how I kind of took those ideas and expanded on them throughout the week. Now coming back to this one, this was a Lenormand reading that I did, and this was just me practicing kind of a 9-card. So I don't have a ton of information in here. I have a little bit of my reflections, but it's mostly, I used a spread. It's called the Portrait Spread, and you can see I totally forgot the R the first time around, so I snuck that in there. From the Caitlin Matthews Complete Lenormand book. So I was just basically practicing, but I think that anytime I do a reading, even when it's practice, a lot of times I get important information out of it. So I go ahead and put it in my journal because those are things that I want to take a look at and reconnect with. And that was just a reading that I did throughout the week with Lenormand. And so coming into my last week of the month, my last week of January, I was working with the Wanderer's Tarot and the Sacred Destiny Oracle. And I did a basic 3-card week ahead spread. And then I did that on Monday. And then on Wednesday, I did a midweek check-in where I just pulled 3 more cards. Now, the funny thing is I pulled Voyage twice. This was not one of those instances where I held the Voyage card out or I came back and got it like I did with this midweek check-in where I was checking in with acceptance. So I re-pulled that card out and laid cards around it. For this one, I actually just pulled the Voyage card twice. So pulled them here, and then on Wednesday, shuffled the deck, drew again, and I still ended up with the Voyage card in the middle. So that was really interesting because that was kind of like, yeah, you really need to pay attention to that one. That one's coming up again and again. So again, just mostly 3 card readings, because for me, those sometimes are some of the most powerful readings I do. Then I also did a Wanderer's spread, which is in the Wanderer's book. There is this little fold out. So this is the booklet that comes with it and has the information, you know, just basic information about the cards, which is plenty for me. But on the back side of it, it folds out and it has this little, it's really about how the deck is structured. So what the element, or what the suit of feathers is, what the suit of knives are, the suit of air, and the suit of water, and what they represent. I turned this into a spread. So for this one, I did, the center card was, you know, from Spirit, what to create. And then we have what to know, what to will, what to dare, and to be silent. And then so I just pulled my cards with my Oracle card in the center for what to create, and then pulled my 4 Wanderer's Tarot cards around it, and then did my message. And that was really fun because I'm not sure if that was meant to be a spread, but it actually works really well as one, and I really enjoyed the reading that I got from that. And I really enjoyed working with these 2 decks together. They worked really well. So then this was a really large spread that I did in terms of how many decks I used. So for this particular one, this was a spread that I did at the very end of the month, and it's kind of just a wrap up of my month and where, you know, moving forward, what I need to pay attention to and that sort of thing. And I used pretty much all of the decks that I used throughout the month of January. Not quite all of them, but most of them. You'll see at the top here, I have the Solera Culto Tarot. I have the Sacred Destiny cards. I have the Wanderer's Tarot here. I used the Moon Void, the Archetypes, the Flowers of the Night, and the Wild Unknown. So I used all of those together to do one big reading that kind of just pulled all of the elements, all of the energy from each of those decks that I used throughout the month, and coalesced into one reading about, you know, where are we going, how's it going, and what do we need to focus on moving forward. So that was a really fun reading that I did, and I think it's also the largest reading I've ever done in terms of how many decks I used, because I used 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 decks. That's a lot for me in a reading. I'm usually like 2 or 3 and that's about it. But it was a lot of fun to do, so I'm really excited I did that. Then I pulled another Devas for moving into February, what I need to keep in mind. And I pulled the Seed Void, and I just wrote, this is basically all from the book, just things that caught my attention from the book. And because I tried to photocopy this card, and it's really, really dark, and it wouldn't come out, so I just drew it instead. And then here I did a little pull with Julie at Peekaboo Rose with her little Contemplation cards deck. What does my intuition say? So I pulled that card, and then I pulled the Breakthrough card from the Messages from the Light deck. So I put that in here as well. And then here is at long last, is my January reflections. And I've decided that in 2020, I want to reconnect with my practice every month by taking a look at how things are going with my tarot practice specifically. So these are specific to my tarot practice. So every month I'm going to ask myself, how did I honor my practice this month? So what did I do? How did I make sure that I made tarot an important part of my spiritual practice, my growth practice, my work practice, whatever it may be? How did I make tarot an important part of my life this month? So in other words, how did I honor my practice? What were the challenges that I faced in my practice this month? Again, specific to my tarot readings. For me, like for example, some of my challenges this month were releasing some of the kind of the preconceived notions or the ideas I had about certain decks, specifically the Wild Unknown Tarot. I had to kind of get over my own issues with that deck and to kind of allow it to tell me its own story, and not to really let my past experiences or things that I have heard or seen or read about it from other people really kind of flavor my work with it. So for me, it was a challenge to kind of like wipe the slate clean with the Wild Unknown deck and kind of give it a second chance, and not bring all of that kind of past baggage, that past work that we've done together that hasn't gone well. It was a bumpy road, and to kind of put all that aside and let things kind of move fresh. So that was a challenge for me this month. And of course, you know, what brought me joy. So what about working with my cards brings me joy? Because I think it's really important. We do a lot of times we do a lot of deep, you know, growth work or shadow work or self-care work or whatever it is with our cards. We do a lot of really deep, important work with our cards, but it's also important to remember the joy that they bring in our lives. So I wanted to make sure to point that out and to make sure I note that every month. And again, like I said, I have that written on this little card here, this little journal card, so that I can just pull this out every month and remember what questions I want to ask myself. Because this insert will be coming out of my book now, and I'll be putting my February one in. And then I did actually end up with 2 blank pages here. So I've a couple of blank pages, and then here's just the end of the book. So as you can see, overall, I mean, technically these could be considered blank pages because I didn't journal on them, but they're decorative enough that they don't feel blank. And that's one of the reasons that I like to make kind of the junk journal style, because even when you like run out of things to write or you hit the end of the month, even though these don't technically have any journaling on them, they don't necessarily feel like blank pages because there's things on them. So they still add interest and texture to your journal. And that was the end of January. So it ended up being pretty much just about the right size. So I'll probably make us the same size for February and go with that. And I think it worked really well. The last thing that I created, or the last insert that I have in here that I created, which I haven't shown on any other videos or anything, is my Tarot by the Moon insert. And this is one that will live in here all year long because I have dedicated it to my readings that I do with Ethony's Tarot by the Moon PDF guide that she puts out. And I'm using the Dark Goddess Tarot and the Dark Days Tarot primarily. So I just wrote a little bit about each of them. This is a page from an old astrology book. I know you guys have probably seen these in my other journals, and I just doodled the moon phases on it just because this is just blank black paper, kind of start of the book type of thing. So here's my first full moon in Cancer reading from January. So I have my reading here, my goddess, my dark goddess that I have, and then my actual reading and my reflections. And as you can see, it's just repeating the same process. So here's my new moon in Aquarius, which I totally forgot to date. I just realized that. And my goddess, and then my reading. And then when I was putting this deck together, because I know, or this booklet together, because I know specifically what's going in here, I actually just counted however many readings that there were in Ethony's PDF, and I made exactly that many pages for it. And they're all kind of just really lightly penciled in with the date so that I could make sure that I was getting the number of pages that I wanted. So this book will be completely filled out by the time I'm done. So this will be my reading for February 9th. So this will be the printout of my reading and then my reflections. And then the reading on the 23rd and the reflections. Moving into March and then the reflections. So every page is marked. I do have one extra page because there were, I think, an odd number of readings. And so I do have some extra papers in here just to kind of add, you know, layers and interest, because I like that in my journals. But when I was putting this together, I did specifically lay out the exact amount of pages that I needed to create this journal. So here we have a few more just interest pages, a centerfold, which I'm not sure what I'm going to do with yet, but it's there. One of the reasons why I do the centerfold like this is because this is thick cardstock and it gives kind of stability to my center point where my band sits. Just gives a little bit more structure and stability than just letting it kind of sit between this kind of thin papery stuff. Just regular old paper, it tends to kind of wear on the tops and bottoms as you open and close it repeatedly throughout the year. So I use cardstock on that just to give it some stability. And then we pick up again with July's readings, and it goes all the way through September. So you can see I have spots for every reading lined up. So I know that when I reach the end of this book, here's the last one on December 29th. That will be the end of my book. So the whole insert will be filled out by the end of the year. So that's a look at my tarot journaling pages from January 2020, the Tarot by the Moon insert that I created, and of course a little bit of that I finished filling out for my dashboard, which we probably won't take a look at really in detail again till the end of the year, because this one isn't really going to change much. It's just a place for me to add lists and things of that nature, and a place for me to refer to my my year ahead spread. So that is pretty much it. Thank you for joining me for this flip through my January journal pages. If you'd like to find out more about any of the decks I used this last month, check out my January reflections video, which we'll find linked in the description box below. I hope you enjoyed this flip through of my journal and will join me again soon for more creative tarot for an inspired life.